Hey friends, welcome back to the Mentor Nation podcast. I'm your host, John Abbas. And if you're watching this video and my eyes are a little red, I just had LASIK 3 days ago. This is my second go around. And I can honestly tell you it's much more brutal than the first go around. But I'm here and I'm excited to be with you guys today. And I'm actually really excited because we're going to cover a topic that I've never had a guest speak about ever on this show. And I'm excited to get into that. So if this is your first time here, thank you so much for joining. Please hit that subscribe button so that you get notifications every time I release a new episode. If you've been here before, I want to welcome you back and just say thank you for all of your support. Okay, so many of you don't know this, but there was another life. 16 years ago, before I ever became an entrepreneur, I spent 6 years in the United States Navy. My job, believe it or not, was nuclear engineering, and it required such an intense amount of schooling. It was 2 years of just insane school, crazy amounts of understanding. Like, I didn't think I was ever going to make it, but I did. And after the schooling was over, when I got to the fleet, I was stationed on board this massive, the largest ship in the Navy, these massive ships called aircraft carriers. And I was stationed for 4 years on the USS Carl Vinson. And I'll just never forget the scope of this ship. It's literally a floating city with 5,000 people on board this ship. And that brings me to my guest today, because I'll never forget when I first got to the ship and I'm like, wow, just the amount of power that it takes to run this boat. And then my superior told me, he's like, well, you think that's crazy? This ship can travel all over the world and it only has to refuel one time every 20 years. And I was like, oh my God, how? Because of nuclear power. And that brings me to today. Today, I probably have one of the most knowledgeable people on the planet on the subject. Scott Melbye is the CEO of the $500 million behemoth Uranium Royalty, and he's also the executive vice president of the billion-dollar company Uranium Energy. And in this interview, Scott and I, we talk about the future of power, why nuclear power has had such a bad reputation, and why that's about to change. And for you guys that are listening, most importantly, we even talk about how fortunes are likely to be made in investing in the mineral that nuclear power depends on, which is uranium. This interview really opened my eyes to a lot of things, led to my diversification of my portfolio and into uranium. And the payoff has been incredible for me so far. So I'm excited for you guys to learn from Scott today. He's an incredible businessman, and it's just a great episode. So enjoy, guys. Scott, thank you so much for being on the podcast. It's great to have you on today, and welcome to the show.
Great. Well, it's great to be here with your network and your listeners and viewers. It's my pleasure.
Yeah, well, I've been geeking out about this interview for some time. You being an almost 40-year veteran of nuclear power, and to the listeners, they may like, oh, nuclear power, but like, you guys are going to be blown away. You're going to be educated, not just on how viable it is as an energy source, but on the money side of things, how you can invest in it. And then for those listening, Scott Melbye is the executive vice president of Uranium Energy Corp and the CEO of an awesome publicly traded company on the NASDAQ called Uranium Royalty Corporation. I'm sorry. And Scott, I was hoping that today we could kind of break this interview into two parts. The first part is just having you educate people a little bit on nuclear power and its role in the green energy revolution. And the second part, I would really like to focus on the investment side of things, because right now there's a lot of craziness going on, bubble markets, people are flocking toward commodities. I know I am, precious metals. And there's one that I really wasn't aware of, which was obviously uranium and the opportunities that lie there. And nobody knows that world better than you. So I'm excited to have you on. But first, man, could you just share a little bit about, your story, how you got into this industry, and what led you to nuclear power?
Sure. No. Well, it's all very timely, certainly with the energy discussions in green energy and energy transitions, and certainly the uranium commodity. So happy to go through all that. But yeah, I've been very fortunate to be in the uranium and nuclear energy industry since the mid 1980s, so 37 years now. And I've always, I come from a mining and resource family, but I was more inclined to the marketing and the commodities, finance, corporate development side of mining than, say, the engineering or geology. And so I got into commodities trading in New York in the mid 80s, but got into uranium trading and brokerage at that time. And since then, I've bought uranium for the Palo Verde nuclear station in Arizona. But spent most of my career on the mining side, and including 3 of the 4 largest uranium mining companies in the world, Cameco out of Canada, Kazatomprom out of Kazakhstan, and Uranium One, the famous Uranium One that was taken over by the Russians, that everybody's read about. So, my career now is much more focused on entrepreneurial endeavors with Uranium Energy Corp. We're a smaller producer and developer out of Texas and Wyoming, but have an incredibly scalable and low-cost technology that we're using to mine uranium in a very environmentally friendly way out of in those 2 wonderful jurisdictions. And we launched Uranium Royalty Corp. As really just not reinventing the wheel, but really copying what's been a very successful model in base and precious metals. Companies like Franco-Nevada, Precious Metals, Royal Gold, Sandstorm. These companies have become a $50 billion industry. In those commodities, we had no such company in the uranium space until we formed the company and launched publicly 2 years ago, and then listed on the NASDAQ earlier this year. So happy to dive into both those.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to start with nuclear power before we get into uranium, because there's nothing that I love more than educating people on something that either they thought they knew or they have no idea, whether it is recycling or how much I've had some crazy guests on here. And, I remember like yesterday, it was 1999. I took the ASVAB, scored really high because I'm great at memorization. And they're like, you should be a nuke. And I didn't know what that was. Like at the time, I thought it was like maybe building bombs or something. And so I get to school, which is 2 years of just intense school. And I was really blown away by just that whole world of nuclear power, how safe it is, and just like the power behind it. And I've been excited and I've been a huge fan ever since. But prior to going in, I had the same mindset that I think a lot of people have, which is, natural, it's dangerous and it's a disaster. So I was wondering if we could start in layman's terms, just having you educate everybody on just what is nuclear power and how does it work in just high level.
Absolutely. Well, uranium is the energy commodity. It's a metal that is mined from the earth and used in nuclear fuel. So the uranium concentrates are the product that are produced from the uranium mine and mill. It's converted into a gas, which then is the feedstock for the enrichment process, which enriches the U-235 isotope to a higher level that will sustain a nuclear reaction in the fuel. Then that material is brought back to a powder, pelletized, put in fuel rods, which are put in fuel assemblies. And the way to think of a fuel assembly is like a heating element, but a very hot heating element that boils water to create steam to turn a turbine that creates electricity. So that back end of the process is the same as the coal-fired plant, and in that the objective is to create heat to produce steam, to produce electricity. So nuclear energy, you're right. I mean, it's had a lot of misperceptions through the years. Public acceptance, for many years has been, 50-50 in public opinion surveys where people either love it or hate it. It's always been politically polarized, the right and Republicans tending to support nuclear power and the left opposing it. But we've really seen a major shift in just recent years where public opinion now is trending closer to 76%. We're seeing bipartisan support in the US Congress. Investment community is viewing uranium investments as ESG or clean investments. These are all very new developments. And it really stems from a realization that if the world, we can debate the whole climate change and everything else, but if the world is moving towards a lower carbon energy future, you can't get there with wind and solar alone. They're good in many cases, but I mean, they run at best 25 to 35% of the time. So if you're going to put the boots to fossil fuels, gas, coal, you really need something to make up the other 75%. And so nuclear has always been clean, carbon free. It's as carbon free as wind and solar. It's what may be surprising is that it's as safe as wind and solar in terms of injuries or deaths since nuclear power began in the 50s. We're as safe as wind and solar, but where we really differentiate ourselves is that nuclear plants run 95% of the time through polar vortexes, through droughts, through hurricanes, pandemics. Nuclear power is keeping the lights on in many of these regions where, even gas-fired generation, that's a great way to make electricity when gas is cheap. But when gas is expensive, you end up with $10,000 power bills like we saw in Texas with the cold snap down there and what happened in that power market. So we're just really seeing nuclear energy kind of find its footing in a lower carbon world. And, it's not a competition for wind and solar. I would say it's more a reliable carbon-free backup or complement to those sources. So it's not surprising. We've seen 56 reactors come online around the world in the last 8 years. We have 51 more under construction. We're beginning to see a new wave of small modular reactors or SMRs or advanced reactors like Bill Gates, his company TerraPower is proposing for the state of Wyoming, where they have 4 big coal-fired power plants that are phasing out, ironically in Warren Buffett's service territory and his utility Pacific Corp, Rocky Mountain Power. And they've got to figure out what to do. Even in coal country, they're phasing out coal-fired power plants. So Bill Gates is proposing an SMR that would be sited on one of those retiring coal plant sites with all the interconnections to the electricity grid. So we're really seeing demand for uranium, which is this growing nuclear electricity around the world. It's really recovered to pre-Fukushima levels.
Yep.
And so the demand side is very strong. Now, on the supply side, uranium production is now lagging global consumption by about 60 million pounds a year in a 190 million pound market. And that's because we've gone through a very low price period after Fukushima. Demand was hit and supplies increased in the form of inventories and secondary supplies. So we've been going through a 10-year bear market in uranium, and it's been very prolonged and very deep, but it's also created the conditions for this bull market that's already begun in uranium and is underway.
Gotcha. Man, that's so crazy. I didn't know that. I didn't know that wind and solar is, I mean, I guess thinking about it, it's obvious, right? Like the wind is only blowing so much and it's only sunny so much. I didn't realize that it was, 30% efficiency. And it's really huge for everybody listening to know that is, when people think of green energy, I feel like all they think about is like wind and solar, solar. I feel like solar gets all of the credit when you have nuclear, which is just as clean, just as safe, and it's 95% reliable. And so that brings me to my next question, which obviously I think one of the big concerns with nuclear power is like the waste, radioactive. And you said something amazing in your other interview, like just how much waste there actually is. And it's not as much as you think. Can you just expand on that? Like how
it's, the safety is a misperception. And I think the waste is another misperception. That's kind of seen as the Achilles heel of nuclear energy. And it's nothing could be further from the truth in that of all the energy sources that we've relied on, again, all the way back to the 50s, nuclear energy has produced and contained and stored safely every gram of waste we've ever produced. We did not pump it out a smokestack. We did not release it out a pipeline into a river or stream or an ocean. We kept every gram of that spent fuel is either in the spent fuel pools at the reactors or is in the dry cast storage, which is a very safe way to store those fuel assemblies, those heating elements when they're depleted of their energy, they're stored in that manner. It may seem like a huge problem in terms of volume. It really isn't. Because of the energy density in uranium, it produces so much electricity and so much power out of such a small unit of mass. All the spent fuel from the United States that we've generated since the 1950s would fit on the size of an American football field.
Oh
15
my
feet high on a football field. So that kind of puts into perspective, whether we go down the route like was proposed for Yucca Mountain in Nevada, that we take a geologic repository that hasn't, a formation that hasn't changed for a million years. Geologists think in millions and billions.
Yep.
So there are things that are stable in the places that can store this safely in perpetuity. But there's also, the option of recycling fuel like the French do with reprocessing those spent. It's essentially recycling. We recycle everything else in society. So
Yeah.
I don't think it'll be long before we take our spent fuel, which is another consideration. Maybe we should store it in a way that we can retrieve it and recycle it when we need every energy source at our disposal to power our economies 50 and 100 years from now. So it's really a manageable problem. It tends to be more political, obviously.
Right.
It's not scientific; it's more political. But it's not an insurmountable challenge.
Yeah. So just to put this into perspective for everybody, because I think this is really cool. You're talking every amount of waste that we've generated since the 1950s. So we're talking 70 years. So can you share that, like, how much power in the United States is being generated from nuclear currently?
Yeah, and that's a surprise to a lot of folks. I mean, we're nuclear generation, nuclear electricity is providing 20% of our electricity supplies in the United States, 1 in 5 homes. Now, it's more concentrated in some states other than others. If you live in Florida or North or South Carolina or Illinois or Pennsylvania, Ohio, you're getting more than 20% of the electricity is coming from nuclear. It's tended to be less prevalent out in coal country, out west, why you have less nuclear plants out west than you have out east. But it's about 20% of our electricity today, but it's a full 55% of our carbon-free energy. So it is our largest source of carbon-free energy. It's not wind and solar. Wind and solar combined, according to the DOE, Energy Information Administration, last year, supplied 10% of our electricity. So for all the talk, all the subsidization, everything, it's still only 10% of our electricity.
Wow. That's so crazy to me. Like that all of that power can be. Now, I wanted to shift into something as well that I thought that I heard correctly. So despite all of that waste being able to fit in a football field, and you mentioned recycling is a viable option in the future, I thought I heard you say that even the waste that we have, 80%, is that correct? 80% of that waste, like the fuel is still, 80% of it is still able to be used for future fuel. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's there's still an incredible amount of energy still in that spent fuel that can be recycled and made into fuel. So, roughly that's about right. The reason we haven't done it is uranium has been relatively cheap, and it's been cheaper for us to just do the once through fuel cycle rather than recycle. But I think, again, going forward 50, 100 years from now, when we're going to be wanting to use every source of energy we have at our disposal, especially with our society becoming more and more electrified, more and more computerized, and in transportation, if we move to electric vehicles the way Elon Musk and others envision, our electricity demands are going to go up, not down. So we better figure out how to produce it cleanly and safely.
Yeah, that was one of my last questions on the nuclear power side of things is like, do you know, or do you have an idea of like how fast our energy consumption is growing right now? Like just as a country, is it like rapidly growing or is it holding steady? Like
Well, it's interesting because in the COVID period, our electricity consumption actually fell for the first time in a long time. But that's definitely reversing, and I think we have to safely assume that the economies are going to come roaring back here if they haven't begun already. And so the expectations are for steadily increasing. I mean, some expectations are that in the United States, our electricity demand could increase by 50% over where we are today
Wow.
if we just adopt electric vehicles the way it's being proposed. But we're a developed nation. Think about India, China, where they're just struggling to get up to our standard of living. Forget about us thinking about powering economic growth and continuing to be the largest economy in the world. They're just trying to get to our level of standard of living and provide electricity to millions of homes that don't even have the equivalent of a light bulb today. So it's not surprising nuclear energy is growing the fastest in Asia, and particularly in China, where they'll surpass the United States within this decade in terms of their fleet.
Oh, can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Oh, okay, perfect. Sorry, I thought it cut out for a second. So this brings me to a pivot that I wanted to make, and I want to reiterate for everybody listening that you're the CEO of a really big company. It's a publicly traded company on the NASDAQ. I was looking at it before we got on this interview, and I wish I'd met you, 6 months ago when the stock was quite a bit lower, but I've seen the trajectory, and that brings me into what I want to talk about now. Just like, I think if you ask a lot of people that are investing right now, we would all probably agree that there's some sort of a bubble market that we all think that we're in right now. And I know myself as an investor, when something like this happens, I try to diversify as much as possible, flock to things that are more safe, hard assets, precious metals, commodities, things like that. And, you have like your core four that we all know: gold, silver, platinum, palladium. But I would love to have you just share a little bit about uranium. But I wanted to start, just, can you share a little bit about like what your company does? Like all the different like arms of your company and what you do.
Awesome. Well, many of your viewers are entrepreneurs themselves. So, as big as our company's grown, we're approaching $500 million market cap. We were just the glimmer in the co-founders' eyes 7 years ago when we got together and we formed the company and took it public in December of 2019. So it's really quite exciting and to see some company that you've created and build it up in that way. But Uranium Royalty Corp is simply a company that goes out and invests in royalties and streams. So a royalty is just a financial interest on a mine development or producing facility, where on each pound of uranium produced, we get a percentage value of that production. And in exchange for that, we may provide financing upfront to a miner developer to earn that right, or we might be buying a royalty or a stream from someone who already has that right, like a landowner or a merger and acquisition party that retained a royalty on a mine development. Royalty is a financial interest in that future production. A stream is a physical interest. So we can also take physical uranium in compensation for the upfront royalty payment that we make. So, or the investment that we make in the mine. So we are a capital provider to the uranium industry. So as the industry now needs to grow and probably spend, as much as $3 billion on new mine development in the coming 5 to 10 years, we'll be out there trying to capture a portion of that for our company, which in turn gives the investors exposure to diversified. It's a pure play investment in uranium, but your risk is diversified amongst. Presently, we have 16 different royalties in the portfolio, including 2 of the world's largest, highest grade mines in Saskatchewan, Canada. So we launch as a young company with a really good royalty portfolio, but it's also very much a growth platform. I mean, we're going to be out there growing and expanding this company with a growing royalty portfolio. So it's an excellent way to play uranium if you don't want to invest in an individual company and try to figure out what their engineering, geological, political risks and everything of their operations are. We're out there with, we're all decades of experience in uranium mining, including the largest uranium companies in the world. We have that experience to do the due diligence, to pick the counterparties that fit in our portfolio that give the investor comfort that we've done our homework. So that's Uranium Royalty Corp.
Yeah.
Uranium Energy Corp is just very straightforward. We're a miner and developer in South Texas. That's our base in Corpus Christi, Texas. We have a hub and spoke of operations, existing operations in Texas, and lots of development projects within 50 to 100 miles of our processing plant. It's just south of San Antonio in Karnes County. So we have not only low capital cost operations to either restart or start up new operations, but ISR mining has become about 50% of global uranium production because of its environmental advantages and its cost advantages. You don't have to build a huge open pit mine or underground mine with drilling, blasting, waste rock, mill tailings. We literally go into the sandstone in the South Texas region. It's around the same Eagle Ford Shale area, and we reverse the natural process that got the uranium there in the first place. We inject sodium bicarbonate, which is like Perrier water, to oxidize the uranium off the grains of sand and pump it to the surface. Looks more like an oil and gas collector well field facility than it does a mine, but it's very, as I said, it's competitive on a global scale, and environmentally, landowners love it. When we're done mining, we restore the surface and underground, and it's back to ranching or hunting or back to their oil and gas, the same land. So
that's so crazy. Like, I wish I knew a lot more about this. So your fund it's kind of like an ETF, basically. I mean, you do the diligence, you bundle them together. That's super, super cool. And the price point is really great, which brings me into my next question, which is, obviously you had mentioned before we hit the record button that the uranium stocks have been up over like 60% in the last 5 weeks. Is that right?
Yeah, well, Uranium Royalty is, I think, the third best performing uranium equity in the world year to date at about a 350% return from January. But that's the top of the class. Many of the better uranium stocks are all up 50 to 100%, but don't think that you've missed we're really in the early stages. The uranium price has gone up 65% in the last 5 weeks. And that's very significant because we were at a period where uranium in the spot market was trading well below the production costs of global producers. So we knew that wasn't sustainable. We know demand has rebounded, as we discussed. We know production's been well below consumption because of those low uranium prices. So as would be the case in any commodity, you're going to have that correct. And we were very much moving towards that rebalancing of the uranium market, which would have occurred in the coming months. But something else happened 5 weeks ago, and that's the emergence of Sprott Physical Uranium Trust, or SPUT for short, or the trade ticker symbol. They have taken the concept of a physical commodity fund or company. Prior to their emergence, they took over Uranium Participation Corp, which was traded in Toronto and was a much more conservative model. And Yellowcake PLC is the British version traded on the London Exchange. But Sprott came and took this and supercharged the concept by entering into an ATM and at-the-market financing. It started out at $300 million of capital available to them. It's now been increased to $1.3 billion. And it allows them to raise money and buy physical uranium off the market and warehouse it on behalf of their investors. And that has just had a wonderful effect of just vacuuming up all the remaining inventories that would kind of been overhanging the market. Yeah. And it's cleaned it up. It's cleaned up the market, and we're now very much at a point where we need new mine production, but the incentives haven't been there. So even mines that have the advantages like UEC, they can't just flip a switch and come on immediately, but some mines are going to have the ability to restart and produce sooner than others. But I think overall, we're in very much of a squeeze right now in terms of uranium supply. And it's not surprising uranium's gone from $17 a pound in 2016 to over $50 a pound today. It's gone up from 30 to 50 in the last 5 weeks. So all the right elements are there. In terms of the investment thesis, the only thing that was lacking, everyone agreed the supply and demand fundamentals were great. It's just, why isn't the uranium price moving? And Sprott's entry has just provided that liquidity and and price discovery that the market needed.
That's awesome. Yeah, that was my big question is, do you still see a lot of upside potential moving forward given the rapid increase in recent weeks? But I guess when you're dealing with a 10-year bear market, it's going to last a little longer than a few weeks, and especially with the circumstances and the situation at hand. That's really cool. My final question, Scott, is could you just share a little bit about your ticker, how people can find your company, and just anything else that you want to leave everybody with when it comes to the opportunity around uranium?
Absolutely. And, I guess in terms of general nuclear energy information, really look to the World Nuclear Association, go to their website out of London to see what's happening globally in terms of nuclear energy. The Nuclear Energy Institute is our equivalent organization here, NEI.org here in the United States. That'll give you broad, nuclear energy information. But for our company, we've got a wealth of information on uraniumenergy.com, and UEC is traded as UEC on the New York Stock Exchange. So awesome. That one's easy to remember. Uranium Royalty Corp, our website is uraniumroyalty.com, and we're traded on the NASDAQ as UROY, UROY, on the NASDAQ. And the website will have plenty of information there. And, awesome. Encourage if your listeners and viewers want to connect with me personally, if they contact you and you can put us in touch with them, we've got time for, we've got a significant and big institutional shareholder base, but we also value the retail investors that have been very loyal shareholders awesome. For us. So I'm happy to reach out to folks if they want more information.
Yeah, well, you've got one retail investor, right? I'm very excited. Scott, I just want to thank you so much for your time. This was very, very educational. It was very helpful, and I really hope it blows a few people away that listen to this, that come into it. I just, like I was telling you earlier, I love interviews like this. I had a gentleman on that was a pro hockey player that turned into, started this food recycling company. Mm-hmm. And man, it was just like this interview. It's just mind blowing how much waste there is. And he just takes all of this produce around the world and like grinds it into like a powder where it retains most of its nutrients and sells. And he built this huge company in doing that. And it's just like, I had a lot of listeners and they're just like, wow, I just had no idea. And then, it's the same thing like this. It's like, people come into the interview thinking one thing, not probably even paying attention, but then they're like, wow, there's this huge energy source right here. This is how it works. This is how it's going to grow. This is why it's going to grow. And then this is how I can actually get involved early stages before the masses really understand, what powers nuclear fuel and how they can be a part of it. So it's just very educational. I just want to thank you for your time. And I'll put all of the links that we discussed today in the show notes, and can't wait to release the episode. And hopefully we'll have the opportunity to chat again in the future.
Absolutely. It's been my pleasure. Thanks for the opportunity to share with everyone.
Absolutely. Thank you.